Exposition is kind of like using a pinch of salt. If you can taste it, you've probably used too much. Writers are in the often unenviable position of both needing to explain how their world works so an audience understands it, so that things make sense when they appear later in the context of the story, but also not have characters standing there like NPCs with unskippable text, yapping about world-building nuances that nobody cares about. It's a difficult balancing act because too little exposition and things can feel like they're happening unfairly, without reason, a sort of narrative entropy.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But too much, and well, audiences are going to struggle to stay engaged. Exposition is something that works best when it goes unnoticed. Even if you don't write fiction yourself, one of the first rules of creative writing that you've all heard is show don't tell. And that works doubly so for a story's exposition. When the author tells their audience exactly what to think, how to feel, and what events transpired in meticulous historical detail, there's a lot of nuance that just disappears. Despite being the more efficient way to convey these things directly, there's something that's just lost in translation. As an audience, we want to draw our own conclusions, to feel like we're putting the pieces together for ourselves, even though it was always the intent of the author to carefully place those pieces around their story, making sure you know they're there. With exposition in particular, telling us point blank about the world can feel amateur and outdated, as if the only way to shoehorn in your world's proper nouns and magic system and world history is have 10-minute monologues putting it all out there. Or even worse, a manufactured conversation between characters that only exists as a thinly veiled way to deliver said exposition dumps in the first place. And in anime as a medium, we're no stranger to this. We have flashbacks, we have monologues, we have diagrams. Exposition can feel heavy-handed and it can really detract from the story being told. It's always corny, antiquated, and above all else, it's just bad writing. But is it? Delicious in Dungeon takes everything I just said about exposition and show don't tell and does the complete opposite, and somehow manages to make this corny, boring exposition the total star of the show. Dungeon Meshi is subversive in a lot of really bold ways, but maybe the most underrated way that it defies convention is by breaking the most obvious rule of fiction time and time again, by directly telling us instead of showing us. In nearly every episode, there's something that I would consider an exposition dump, either about monsters, cooking, the dungeon itself, the relatively unknown magic systems, our characters' pasts, or something happening in the broader world, both above ground or in the Golden Country. Dungeon Meshi shirks the advice that we shouldn't tell and instead offers up lengthy exposition on a platter, knowing that it can cleverly utilize this to build its world. But hold up, Dom, isn't that bad? You literally just convinced me that all this stuff was amateur writing a minute ago and now you want to argue that it's genius and subversive? Well, that's because it's only the half of it. That's not to say that Dungeon Meshi doesn't show us anything. It does. But because our scope of knowledge is so limited in those early episodes and chapters, so much of what Dungeon Meshi shows us doesn't even register as being maybe important. Winged lion motifs everywhere in the dungeon, desires, souls, ancient magic circles, Kabru's backstory, a literal hoofprint in Senji's helmet, Marcel's nightmare in the second episode. Dungeon Meshi is showing us all along. We just have no idea what we're looking at. Yet. In my last video, I talked about how Dungeon Meshi plays with flipping our expectations of its tone by slowly descending into horror from being a laid-back cooking anime. But I would also just as readily add that Dungeon Meshi does the same with messing with our expectations of plot and characters too. It's no secret that Dungeon Meshi's characters are highlights of the series, but I think they also secretly do some very heavy lifting on exposition from a writing perspective. The characters are like this Trojan horse of complexity into a series that wants you to think it's simple. We enter Dungeon Meshi knowing quite literally nothing about the world, and aside from our initial surface level impressions of the characters and their immediate situation, we know nothing about the characters or the story either. Dungeon Meshi's cast covers a fairly standard array of fantasy archetypes: a warrior, a mage, a thief, and a ranger, with secondary and tertiary characters introducing us to a samurai, barbarian, cleric, wizard affectionate, wizard derogatory, priestess, ninja, old-ass man, whatever Micbeth spell is, etc. All of the major archetypes of fantasy tabletop games, maybe even fantasy in general, coexist within the upset stomach of Dungeon Meshi. But it's by using standard archetypes so blatantly that Dungeon Meshi can really weaponize making them radically different than what we expect. And this goes for characters, monsters, the setting, everything. This will be important for future videos. In the main party we have Laios, Marcel, Chilchuk, and Senshi. And without being reductive, I think we can pretty safely assign their interests into the following. Laios is intensely knowledgeable and passionate about monsters. Marcel is well studied in magic, both what is taught at the academy and what is strictly forbidden and or ancient. Senshi knows the ecology and the layout of the dungeon's early floors, the economy of trade, and of course, cooking. And Chilchuk knows typical rogue stuff, navigation, lockpicking, disarming, and mimics. He surely knows how to deal with mimics, right? Oh, okay. But because these characters are also intensely passionate about their singular, all-consuming interests, pun intended, as well as being relatively clueless or straight up bad in every other aspect, we have this party of total underdogs that comes together as greater than a sum of their parts that we can root for. And surprisingly, they're well equipped for handling this dungeon. For each encounter, we can predictably count on Laios to relay information about the monsters, how they act, their biggest weaknesses, what they might taste like. If there's magic, Marcel will explain it to us like we're 5. Senshi and Chilchuk will harken back to their experiences in the dungeon after years of exploration. And if there's more we need to know, other characters like Kabru, Tansu, Yod, they all serve as surprisingly excellent ways to reveal more about this world, expanding the scope of the story in ways nobody ever could have expected. And that's all exposition. It's boring and lame, right? But it's also so damn captivating because of how little we as an audience actually know, how curious we are about the world, and how quickly Dungeon Meshi takes liberties with what we think we know. When Senshi's telling us how monster ecosystems work, or Marcel is revealing some real magical ball knowledge, it really feels like we're learning alongside the other characters of the party. And Dungeon Meshi once again builds its world outward, subtly, through nothing but this conversational banter between friends. But all of those silly, lighthearted conversations are the exact same boring exposition, just Metal Gear Solid stealthed into your simple, cozy cooking anime. Only this time, we actually care. Because the show feels like it's rewarding us for paying attention, for noticing those puzzle pieces, and that's important. But there's also just this real roll of the dice on whether each reveal is actually telling us something earnest about the story, something darker about the world, or just setting up a silly joke. And honestly, you can never be too sure. After all, the biggest unreliable narrator of Dungeon Meshi is kind of Dungeon Meshi itself. The characters can't be lying to each other if they don't know the truth. And that's something the series takes some great joy in playing around with, especially rewatching and realizing just how much foreshadowing was secretly shown to us the entire time. It's this whole exposition feedback loop that makes these reveals so rewarding, and the writing so addicting. It's either amazing when they're played straight in earnest, or hilarious when they're just a bit. And because we never know what we're getting, it keeps us on our toes and ready for our next adventure.